This here is a triangle that we did with a little guy. Kind of the same thing. His was a 7-year-old, 8-year-old Hispanic boy. Little brother was murdered. He had been taken away from mom, and he's in foster care now. The event is not living with mom. The thought is, I'm never going to see mom again. And because I think I'm never going to see mom again, I'm angry, I'm frustrated, I'm sad, I'm lonely, I'm scared. And because of that, I'm not listening, I'm yelling, I'm throwing chairs. Now be mindful that when I'm doing this, I am the author. And this is what he said for the positive. And I'm going to say it once, and then y'all are going to get it. He said, being good to be back with mom. As clinicians, do we get that? And so I helped facilitate maybe a different statement, that I will see mom again. So I helped him facilitate even that positive thought. But that's what we do, is we facilitate them doing the work. But I always like sharing this because of the meaning of what he wrote, being good. Because to our kiddos, sometimes they feel that they've done something wrong. Sometimes they feel the burden of not sharing what's really going on because they don't want to burden their caregivers. They don't want to see mom cry. They don't want to give mom one more thing to worry about. All right, so these are just some other things that I've done. The trauma narrative, of course, that is when the kiddos are ready to share that because they've already had the psychoeducation, they've already learned how to relax and self-regulate, talking about the uncomfortable things. They've already learned how to identify those feelings, those emotions. They know how to describe them. They know how to show where I feel it. They know how to share it with their caregiver. Once they have reached that level, then that's when they're ready for the narrative. And that's sharing that narrative, practicing with the clinician before sharing it with the caregiver. In vivo, of course, how I use that is there's certain words that we use at the center. We use dead, death, but some of the families will say passed on, passed away. The conjoint sessions, again, are really important because that is when they're kind of making meaning of everything for them. What does that mean now? Who am I now? So task 1, we're putting it all together, right? Task 1 is accepting the reality of the loss. That's the in vivo. That's they're not going to be here physically again. That is saying they are dead instead of saying dad passed away. Affect modulation, they're learning how to identify, describe, and share. The cognitive coping, this is connecting that negative thought with their feelings and behaviors in order to adapt and live in an environment without their person here. And of course, making meaning is making meaning of what is this now? What does this mean for us now and moving forward? And then moving forward, how am I going to celebrate my person? And sometimes that's difficult in trauma. And sometimes it's difficult because maybe that person hurt the child. How many times have we had that type of trauma? I'm working right now with a young gal who AP was the one who died by suicide. So she was sexually abused by him. She's very confused because everybody's grieving, she says, this great man. Very confusing to her. Can you imagine? I see you all shaking your heads, so you understand this. So as clinicians, that's our job, to make her feel safe, right? To share, to identify, to go through all of that. But making meaning, and sometimes they get stuck in, how do I celebrate this person when this person was this, or did this? And then sometimes it's a family member. How do I love this person who has hurt this other person? How do I love my husband who hurt my child? How do I love my son who has hurt my daughter? So there's a lot of struggle in that. The case study is 12-year-old Hispanic girl. Mom was murdered. After mom died, she went to live with maternal grandmother and then paternal grandmother who physically abused her. Dad bio father tried to reunify with daughter. It didn't work out. He ended up in jail. So she went to a foster home. So for her, the first thing that we needed to do was identify her trauma. Because what do we think? We're trying to figure out what the trauma is, right? So how I did that is I did a timeline. How many people do timelines? So by having the child identify that timeline, I maybe thought that the trauma was maybe the abuse. But to her, that wasn't the trauma, or the homicide. The trauma was the abuse. So she wasn't able to grieve mom because she was stuck in the trauma. Some of our kiddos are not able to grieve because they are taken from their homes. And if you notice, I don't say parents, I say caregivers, because sometimes I don't know and I don't want to offend anyone. So she was taken from her home, and she's placed in not foster, but she's placed with other family members that weren't taking care of her the way they were supposed to. And so to her, they let her down. She was stuck. She was stuck in the trauma of being abused. So she wasn't able to process mom had died. Not only mom had died, somebody killed my mother. So what do you think in her timeline was apparent to me that what I thought the trauma was, which was the death, but to her was the abuse? What do you think appeared to me that I figured that out?
Her distress in talking about it?
The way she talked about it? Yes. Because when she went through her timeline, and we start at your first memory, what is your first memory? Because at first they don't know what a timeline is, right? So do you remember your first memory? And I share, oh, my first memory was I was in the hospital and was looking out the window, and I remember seeing my cousin and my sister waving at me. Like, oh yeah, I remember. So she said her first memory was when she was outside and she saw something on somebody's roof. So she described that. Then we went on. And then she described the finding mom. And then she went on, then I went to grandma's, and grandma left, and I was alone a lot, and I was scared when I was alone a lot. And then I went to other grandma's, and she used to lock me in a closet, and I was really scared. But she said that way I would be safe. And then she went on and described what happened with her mother. So in that instant, that's when I knew that was the trauma, was the abuse, because she was trying to justify why she was being placed in the closet. And so with a timeline, what I think in my head is, what do I need to park and what do I need to focus on? And as clinicians, that's what we do. We have to make sure that we meet our client where they're at. Because if I went straight to processing the trauma of mom dying, then I missed the boat. I didn't do my job by listening and being present to what her trauma really was. Does that make sense to everyone? Has anybody had something that they would like to share? Something similar that maybe they thought it was a different trauma? Think back.
So you're talking about with that client?
With a client.
Yeah, we had, there was a 15-year-old boy.
Can you stand up? And
Oh, yeah.
I think it's this. Is it this one?
Oh, good. Can you guys hear me? So, yeah, we had a client. He was a 15-year-old boy, and he just had you know, if you look at the list of ACEs, he met so many of those criteria. And so we had him do a timeline where he talked about, you know, different things that happened throughout his life. And there were several that really stuck out to me. He talked about being separated from his family, going to juvenile detention, getting out. He talked about, you know, dabbling in really hard drugs like cocaine and things like that. And so when he was asked which one has been the most traumatic, he said juvie. And I would have assumed that it was when his parents separated, because that would have been like the, I guess, like the spring of all these things happening. But it wasn't. And so I was really surprised by, I guess, like his perception of his own traumatic experiences. So
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. So it happens, right? I had a 16-year-old African-American female who was sexually abused by a teacher. We did a timeline. She was at a certain age, dad left. Mom had a new boyfriend, and she really loved him. He was really nice to everybody. He would play with her. He would make her dinner. Then he left. Then she goes through the rest of it, and then she talks about what's happening currently, why she's seeing me. To me, I thought the trauma was the sexual abuse from the teacher. What do you think she said about that relationship? Yes. That's not a trauma. That was my boyfriend. That's not traumatic to me. So for her, the trauma was those male figures leaving. And how do you think that the perpetrator groomed her? Right? Do y'all see the connection of all of that? And if I would have missed that, I would have missed the core. And let me tell you, and we all have these clients, I don't know where she's at. She stopped coming. How many of those have you had clients where you wonder, it's like, wow, hope they're okay. They haven't come back. So she didn't come back because we started processing the abandonment. And that must have been really difficult for her. I hope that she went and sought help somewhere else, because we as clinicians know that if you don't process it, there's going to be those milestones that you're going to be re-triggered, re-cued, right? When you're a teenager, when you fall in love, maybe when you have sex for the first time, when you get married, and then when you have your child. And what about when your child is 6 years old when that trauma happened to me? So those are the things as clinicians that we just try and keep in mind. Yes, sir?
Don't you think sometimes, though, the person is not at a place that they can process that?
Yes.
The environment?
And they're not ready.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They don't have the capacity, or they don't have the environment.
I agree. And as clinicians, that's not our job, is to force them to process something, because that could be abuse of power, right? Does that make sense? If they're not ready, we can't keep going at it with them, because they're not ready. And we are at a level of professional, so they think, okay, this is the professional. They know. And that's when we have to be very mindful of staying in line with our client and meeting them where they are at. Some of the things to remember: they are stuck. That girl was stuck in that abandonment. Clinicians assist in helping children and caregivers process the trauma in order for them to heal and to mourn naturally. Again, processing that trauma in order for them to get to that grieving process. One thing I would like to share is there's so many agencies in the San Antonio area. If you can make connections with other agencies, I worked at Child Safe. I still have connections with them working with the shelter, or working with the other people who work with children. Make those connections, because it's not about us. It's not about, oh, they had to come here. It's not. It's about what is best for that child. And if they need to process the sexual abuse, then the best place to go is child safe. They need to go and process that. Maybe when they're ready to process the bereavement, then they'll say, okay, now you can go to the bereavement center. At the shelter, what is the model there? TBRI? Anyone from the shelter here? TBRI. Trust. Those kiddos do not trust the system because they've been in the system. So being here, meeting other clinicians that help other children, having that opportunity for outreach and reaching other clinicians, and what I'm doing here is just really helpful, because again, looking around this room, we all have the same mission. We're here to help our children in our community, and by helping our children, we're helping their families. I think that's it. Does anybody have any? I have, thank you. I have resources on there for TF-CBT, for the CTG. They're all at the NCTSN. Is there anyone else? Thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your conference.